Some things have to end for better things to begin. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today revolves around the country's economy, but we've broken it down to two main aspects. One is customs, the other one is taxation. Now, what kind of revenue can these two areas bring into the country and revive the country's economy? Joining us this evening on the show are Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo; Sujeewa Mudalige, former CEO of PwC. Also joining us this evening on the show is Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocate Institute, as well as N.R. Gajendran, Senior Partner of Gajendran. He's also a tax consultant. To pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate right is Theruni Karunaratne, on to my immediate left is Nirveshile Thambi, Consultant Director at Newsfirst. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. The number to send in your messages via WhatsApp is 076 656 5353. The number once again 076 656 5353. So let's get the ball rolling today with Rohan Masakorala, CEO of Shippers Academy of Colombo. Rohan, many moons ago, many years ago, your first time on Face the Nation, I recollect in your closing remarks, you spoke about a book describing Dubai. You said Sri Lanka should plan and intend to get to this benchmark as we move along as far as Sri Lanka's journey is concerned. Now we have a new government, renewed vigor has been put into the country's economy. People's mandate has changed very vastly to what it was a couple of years ago. My question to you is very simple. Are you satisfied the way in which things have panned out since that time you came on Face the Nation and said, we have to move ahead, just like Dubai?
Absolutely not. Dubai actually, my vision was the book of the ruler of Dubai. And the book number 2 also has come after that. So Dubai has moved from my vision 1 to my vision 2. We have gone from the existing vision backwards probably 10-15 years back. That's how I have seen over the last few years.
Right. So Rohan, you're coming on the show after some time. I want to pick your brain on this recent meeting that was held between President Anukumar Dissanayake and customs officials. Now, one of the pledges that was made by the custom officials was the fact that they would run operations for 24 hours for a period of 6 months. Now, I was trying to figure out, isn't this the role of the customs department in Sri Lanka? Aren't they supposed to run 24 hours a day to nab any legal activity? Why is the president micromanaging at this level?
Well, you answered my question. I asked the same question. This was not a problem that should have been gone into the president's discussion. Because he was talking about containers moving out of gates and the queues, and very micro I thought that discussion was, because you are right. When we have an international port that is number 22nd in the world, customs should be working 24/7 just like the port does. Port doesn't wait for tomorrow morning to operate ships, because ships won't wait for them. They come, they discharge, whatever time they come, the window berth, they operate. So customs have to be running the same and facilitate trade. Customs, one of the jobs is trade facilitation. So maybe there's an issue on sometimes 24/7 might not be practical with the domestic economy, because some of our traders also don't work on Saturday, Sundays. So the system has got used to. Once we tried on Saturdays, full Saturdays, a long time back when Mr. Sarajaya was the customs chief, and people are not going on Saturdays, Sundays to do their work. So there was a problem from the trade side also. But as a customs, when you see that there are enough data, how volumes increase, decrease on particular days and all that, there has to be systems put by customs. So the customs is responsible for managing the cargo flow in a very efficient manner. That is what you call efficient ports, where the border controls are critical. Now, that is why our logistics performance index is nowhere in the world. India has been 90s, India is in 30s, right? So you don't have to go far away to see what has happened.
No, but I'm just trying to figure out, Ron, I don't know, when you have a secretary to the president who has been an ex-customs officials, why are we talking about these matters right now? It shows that the president is getting into the net of those activities that happened prior to him becoming the president.
Absolutely, you are 100% true. I mean, I disagreed with that meeting when I saw that meeting, what the discussions were, what was the outcome. These were very minute micromanagement stuff. This country needs way above thinking the micromanagement should be somebody else's job, but unfortunately I think we lack people. We lack credible people who can come out with solutions at government level, or they're very happy with the existing systems, because we know that top of the country we have a corruption problem. IMF analysts say that we have a governance issue, right? That is the diagnosis says that. So part of the governance issues is with the border control authorities. Customs, ports, airports, all this, we do have a serious problem.
So Rohan, in the government's defense, they could say that they collected revenue up to 1.5 trillion rupees this year, but what we as individuals who are hailing from the private sector, we always believe what got you here won't get you there. So you have to always remember what the benchmark is and strive to achieve that benchmark, rather than saying we achieved 1.5 trillion and stop there. So don't you think even this is just not planned out properly? What must the customs do in order to get this right? At least put some KPIs, make sure all these are achieved, and rigorously look at strategic growth. All that and more has to come into play. So where do you see the president's role in this in this program?
I think this is very straightforward, because I've been talking about this for good 30 years in trade facilitation. The customs law is outdated. We all know that. So
how old is this?
210 years plus.
210 years?
It's a British customs ordinance, which has about, when I exited the industry operationally, we had about 47 patches. You mean bring in some patch to do something. So digitalization was proposed from last 2 decades, various. Now all the countries have moved forward. You see what happened is we were ahead of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, right? Now Pakistan has a single window act itself to avoid this customs problem, because customs ordinance governs them. But when you have the Pakistan National Single Window Act, which they brought in, customs have to fall into to facilitate that act. So customs is not the lord of the revenue generation who is responsible. Here you have leakages because the law is in trouble. You can put anybody into trouble with the law. So that is where the first problem is. Second is, everybody talks about digitalization. We are 20 years behind digitalization.
No, but I just want to understand, Rohan. I just want to understand what exactly is going on, because coming from an export background, during COVID, we did not see individuals coming to the port. We did not see individuals handling all these matters. Everything was properly digitized. Everything happened very smoothly. There was no issue at all. But why is it that we are facing this problem once again? Why are we talking about these problems over and over again?
Yeah, because during COVID time, life mattered more than money. Very simple.
So you're saying the custom officials were selfish at that time?
Of course. Of course, there is. I mean, we all know there is corruption in the customs. There is nothing to hide about it. They themselves accept it. I mean, there are officers good. There are good officers in customs. Very good officers. I am a person who don't go and carpet bomb an institution, but there is a strategic policy of corruption set up, not only by customs. The trade is also involved. Intermediaries are also involved. So it's a system that has gone through like a cancer, right? So correcting that is, law has to be in place, technology has to be in place, and a shift of attitude. So that policy shift of attitude is the responsibility of the government. When they have a 2/3 majority, they can't be waiting to amend the Customs Act. They should have been ready 10 years back, because Mangala Samarveera brought a customs amendment law in 2017, right? So they should have looked at it, see what they wanted to change as their policies, and within 10 days of government, that should have been passed, because they have 2/3 in the parliament, right? So these are delays. Whether they understand, as you said, the president's secretary is supposed to be an ex-customs officer, right?
With a man with a lot of integrity as well.
Yeah, so then none of us should be telling anything. He should know what's cooking inside, right? Why is all these delays coming? He should not be calling the executive president to come and listen and say why there is a problem at the gate. No, he should know, no, right? So I am also confused, puzzled. So my position is very clear. This matter is not a president's matter.
Thanks a lot, Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. But very quickly, Rohan, do you think this 1.5 trillion rupees that was collected in revenue could be increased if the system was digitized?
Definitely.
What's the number that we're talking about?
I cannot give you a number, but I can definitely say, because I can give you an example, something. In 2014, the Sri Lanka customs brought in the Georgia customs into Sri Lanka, which was one of the most corrupt customs, but it ranked to number 8 in the world. And at that time, Georgia had 21 taxes in their system. You can Google it and check. After customs automation, they brought down the number of taxes to 8, because the revenue started really flowing in through the customs border system. So it's proven, and it's nobody has to reinvent the wheel. You can see so many countries, so many hubs, whether it is Singapore or United Kingdom or Australia, you see whether efficient customs is digitalized, fully digitalized, and less paperwork, less people, less processes. Right? We had a presidential commission on customs reforms, headed by a Supreme Court judge from Central Bank. That report is also with the President's office. None of it is action. Probably, I don't think none of them have read it.
But intelligence also plays a big role,
yes,
right?
That's part of the customs, any customs system.
So that means individuals are needed, people are needed.
Very talented, high-end individuals are needed, and there's a global customs network, and they share information, and that has to be done. So intelligence plays the most thing. For you, another example of Port of Rotterdam is Europe's major entry point to all of Europe. Right? They only scan 2% of the containers. Rest of it is all intelligence based.
And very quickly, Rohan, I want to move to Sujeewa. Very quickly, I've heard this story that Sri Lankan custom officials have gone overseas to revamp and look at the customs, how they operate in other countries, and advise them. Why can't they do it in Sri Lanka?
Well, our environment doesn't support them to do that. There are so many talented officers here. The countries are Fiji, Papua New Guinea. Systems were set up by our office. Our additional director generals of customs, they have gone and worked there and set up systems. So here the political will was never there, right?
But do you think Andukumar Dissanayake has that will?
I personally feel the president has it. He wants to do some change. I don't know the rest of the people, because you need to have a team to do it, right? Government has to have proper policies, framework developed, and he's the minister in charge, all right. I don't know if these so many ministries also headed by president is also something that I don't believe it. If you look at Jayajavardhana, our peak of good growth in 78 to 82, Ronnie Dimel was the Minister of Finance who was in Parliament, right? Jayajavardhana didn't hold the finance ministry, right? Similarly, if you look at President Premadasa's area, where the garment factories, the BOI, all that, former president, he was his finance minister for a short period when President Premadasa was there. There was a finance minister full-time in the parliament, right? So I don't know whether President AKD has a commitment, passion to change something, but when you hold so many things, that means you are showing that you don't have a proper team. Because you can't give somebody and say, you do digitalization and report to me, these are my targets. He
has 96 departments under him.
That's very tough, I must tell you. That's very tough.
Right. Thanks a lot, Rohan Masakorala, CEO of Shippers Academy of Colombo. We'll have more questions to you, Rohan, as we go along. We have now Sujeewa Mudalige, former CEO of PwC. Sujeewa, when I started off the show, I said we are breaking down this topic today to two main aspects. One is customs and one is taxation. I forgot to mention the Colombo stock market as well. Tell me, what is happening at the Colombo stock market now? It's very, very bullish. There seems to be a bubble. A lot of money is coming in. Why not look at taxation even at the Colombo stock market if it's prudent enough to get more revenue to the country? Your time starts now.
Yeah. So just one thing on revenue, you mentioned, Shamir, customs is 1.5 trillion for 2024, right? Highest ever. So you must give some credit, but the reason why they are collecting more is because of the VAT rates went up and some other exemptions were taken out. Indian revenue has collected just under 2 trillion, 1.9 to be exact. Say 2 trillion, so 2 plus 1.5 is 3.5. And the other big government agency is the Excise Department, which collects on
liquor
and cigarettes and so on. They have collected 250. So altogether, 2, 1.5, 3.5 and 0.25, 3.75. So in total, we are getting close to 4 trillion. Right, when you put the others, grants and all other things coming in, just under 4 trillion. And this will be the first year in history that we actually reach the budgeted revenue number in our 74-year history. First time.
So we have achieved it.
Numbers are still not out. Agencies have given out, as you said, customs number is 1.5, just under 1.9 to 2 trillion from Inland Revenue Department. And excise have said they are collecting 250 billion. So just under 4 trillion, record number. But the main reason is that VAT rate went up and we took off most of the exemptions that were there, the VAT exemptions, like medical equipment, school books and all these other things that are brought in. So it has been a record year. So there is some credit needs to go into these agencies as well. And you asked the question, how much more can it go? I'll give you one simple example, right, before I come to your stock market question. When you look at the 2025 appropriation bill was released, Shamir, about 2 weeks ago, it was debated in Parliament. The amount that they have given for health and media now, which goes together, 500 billion, right? The total allocation. Do you know how much the three big companies, who what we call the sin industries, we have 3 sin industries, no? One is gaming and gambling, other one is cigarette, other one is liquor. And the easiest thing, as you know what happened last week, you just keep on increasing these things as if there is, like there's no tomorrow. Easiest way to collect taxes. Do you know how the 3 big companies, that is the biggest, the cigarette company, I won't mention names, the biggest hard liquor company, Arak company, and the biggest beer company, the soft liquor company. You know how much taxes and levies and excise duty and so on, how much they pay for a year? 300 billion. Out of the 500, our health budget is 500 billion. So so don't take me wrong here, I'm not in any way advocating smoking and consuming alcohol. Out of the 500 billion budget, 300 billion is paid by three companies. And there are another about 20 other companies who are manufacturing alcohol. And I'm leaving them aside, right? Including some politicians, as you know. Imagine, and I was told that we can cover the entire health budget. Because now the shortfall is about 200 billion, 500 billion budget, 300 billion paid by the companies, that is smokers and drinkers, the tipplers, right? They said even the 200 billion can be covered without you and I paying our taxes to go into health, which we must improve, there's no doubt on that. If there is proper alcohol policy to make sure there is no kasippu, because today a bottle of arak is 4,000 rupees.
And moonshine is going
at 500 rupees, right? And BD and Kerala ganja, whenever I look at your news every day, they say Navy is apprehending people with Kerala ganja. So they're all smoking this, right? And the BD industry, completely, virtually outside the tax net. And one of the guys who are in this industry told me, we can cover the entire health budget. And we haven't seen a government policy for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And we are allowing, what are we doing? We are increasing the taxes. So we are taking away more and more people at the lower segment of society. We are taking them into these industries. So we are losing, in my view, is about 200 billion. It's about 200 billion is the amount that is lost by not bringing in these people into the tax net. So don't get me wrong again, I'm not in any way advocating consuming alcohol and promoting smoking. But the fact is that a big contributor of taxes, these 3 companies, right?
On the stock market.
And the stock market, right? So if you look at the stock market, Shamir, from during the year 2024, I believe the stock market is up about 67% is the number, if I got the numbers right. It's about, say, 70%, right? And that is one place, Shamir, where wealth is created. Right? And as you know, a capital market is required for any country to grow. As you know, government has no money for anything. So it has to be, if you want to grow, Shamir, see, we are all talking about growth. No? So one thing is, if you want to grow, You need savings, you need capital, and government doesn't have the capital. You need private capital and foreign capital. So you need FDI, and you need local savings, and you need local capital, right, to take on do these large projects and to look at growth at a much higher rate. So stock market is one place where people can raise capital.
Right. So I want to interrupt you there, Sujeewa. Now, you spoke about the stock market being a place where wealth can be created.
Absolutely.
I just want to go back around 12 years ago, in 2011-12, where the pump and dump was very prominent in the Colombo stock market. And as a news director at that time, we were reporting on this very vigorously on our news as well. Many individuals lost their lives. They committed suicide.
Correct.
They lost money. And I don't understand, Sujeewa, this argument saying the stock market is a place where wealth is created, because at the end of the day, because of a few individuals, it becomes the most corrupt place filled with insider trading at the Colombo stock market.
Yeah. See the problem, I agree with what happened around 2012-13, right, about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So action should have been taken. See, it's all about proper supervision and enforcement. See, if you don't have that, you have to regulate it, supervise it, and then you have to enforce it. So unfortunately, at that time, no action was taken. And central mind you, at that time there was involvement of central bank as well.
Sujeewa, you very well know the CSC, the Security and Exchange Commission chairman was sitting on the board of a private hospital in Colombo at the same time. So this is a conflict of interest, insider trading to your
I agree.
naked eye.
So that is where we fail. That is where, in my view, regulation failed. Regulation failed. You are right. I completely agree with
that. That is what is happening even now as we speak. You see a few big, high net worth individuals operating in the Colombo stock market. If this has to be regulated, impose a tax.
See,
why is it tax free?
So I agree. So at the moment, transactions within the Colombo stock exchange is tax free, but there is a levy, transaction levy.
Very small.
Yeah, a levy which revenue is generated to the government, right? But that is one place, Shamir, where if you want private enterprise to thrive, and if private enterprise is to be the so-called engine of growth and then to take charge of this growth trajectory, which in my view, government can only facilitate. It's a private enterprise that can grow this country, and foreign capital, right? No one else. We need the stock market, but I agree with you. We need to have far better intelligence. We need far better supervision and enforcement. And if any wrongdoer, but to give credit to the commission, if you look at over the last couple of years, right? I mean, there was one historic amount relating to one of those trades which you mentioned, and I think the parties involved was fined about 230 million, highest ever. Listed company directors, individuals were fined, right? I'm not sure whether the company was also fined in addition to the individuals, the owners, right? 230 million, highest ever. And you know where that money went? It went back to the EPF. The court order was not that the money came to SEC.
Yeah, but
like that, there were many.
Yeah, but this is the only time this has happened. Like insider trading in Sri Lanka doesn't even have regulations to really prove that there is intent behind it.
We have been slow. There should be enforcement should be far more and should be quicker.
But don't you think right now there's black money flowing into the Colombo stock market?
I don't think so, because it has to come through the banking system, no, Shamir. So central bank is regulating all these banks, and I don't buy into that argument, because all this money has to come through the banking system. And as you know, the banking system is very vigilant and very well regulated, and I don't think there is black money coming into it. I just want to say one other matter on this taxation matter.
Yeah, very quickly, Sujeewa. Is it short or
very short?
Right. Okay.
Very short.
Yeah.
See, one other thing is that I think one of the things that needs to be done is that we need a comprehensive review of our, as you mentioned, on customs and also on taxation. I'll give you one simple example, right? One example. See, we imported rice now, no? There was no rice, Ratu Kakulu, and everyone, when I look at your news every day, you know, saying Ratu Kakulu ne, right? We imported about 100
170 metric tons.
170,000, right? 170,000 metric tons. Do you know how much tax is being paid by every household that is buying a kilo of rice, of this imported rice? Say someone in Anuradhapura, poor, say a labourer is buying a kilo. We are paying 65 rupees of tax. When we buy it at 220 rupees, we pay 65 rupees of tax. And then at the same time, we give, our policy is that we give duty-free car permits to the affluent professionals and the heads of institutions in Colombo. We give, and parliamentarians, we give car permits. And every kilo of rice that we imported during the last month, we pay 65 rupees of tax on this imported rice.
Yeah.
You can just see how lopsided our taxation and customs policies are.
Sujeewa, very quickly, before I move to Dhananath. So, don't you think it's prudent to at least bring in a tax for the capital gain that you're making from the stocks?
See, two sides to the coin.
Now, because
Right.
let's say when you're losing money, then it's a big problem.
Yeah.
But when you're making money, you can, because there is capital gain tax anyway.
Yeah.
That was been discussed very vociferously during Ranil.
Yeah, I mean, it will dampen for sure it will dampen the stock market. But I mean, there is nothing to say that this is not possible as another avenue of raising revenue, because raising revenue is a critical.
How much can we raise?
Offhand, I am unable to say how much the capital gain is. I mean, we know the turnover numbers,
Right.
But it has to be only on capital gain. No, I mean, you bought a share at 100.
Yeah, but
this year, 70%, the index is up about 70% for 2024.
So let's say for an example, Sujeewa, I know you're very quick in making the numbers. Let's say someone who has invested in 1990 in the Colombo stock market and is now selling their stocks.
Yeah.
How much of a gain are we talking about? Sujeewa?
I mean, it has gone up. I mean, is couple of hundred times.
So
at least, sorry, not a couple of hundred times. Easily 20-30 times.
Easily
20-30 times. So certain stocks only. Some of the stocks haven't. I mean, it all depends, right? Some of the companies have gone bust and you have lost money.
Yeah, but the blue chips are doing quite well.
And the blue chips are doing quite well.
Right.
It's a place, Shamir, I think you should look at investing as well.
Looking at it. Thanks a lot, Sujeewa Mudalige, former CEO of PwC. I now move my attention towards Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocate Institute. Dhananath, this time Christmas was very luxurious. You know why? A lot of people have had full sambal because coconut was very difficult to find. Then they had rice. There was canned fish. It was all good. This time Christmas was very good. I just want to understand, now Dhananath, you've been on this show a couple of times and you've always told the people how imposing a maximum retail price has never worked. However, now, today, before I came to the show, I went to several supermarkets. Canned fish was available. There was coconuts available. Red rice was not available, but there was kiri samba available at 230 rupees per kg. The theory that you did before or spoke before has not really worked in this instance, has it?
No, I think the theory remains still valid, Shamir, because of the demand-supply issue. Sometimes the prices come down, but just because it is not coming down in that case, just because you imposed a price control, because if you look at the coconuts that were available, that were, in terms of size, it was very small. I mean, what was available, even at least in my area.
Yeah, remember, let's not forget, Dhananath, there was a time that based on the diameter of the coconut, also, there was a price.
Absolutely. So this has never worked for sure. Even in canned fish and even in most of the essential goods, this has never worked. And we did a documentary and a study, and what importers said was, Mr. Masakorala knows this better than I do. Basically, when they are importing, when you have a price control, they import the lowest quality which can match the control price. So you are putting the entire population on a massive health risk, and price controls have never ever worked. So I think it is not foresighted to impose price controls. But I would like to touch upon what Sujeewa mentioned on the taxation on rice, because now look at from the when we were at the same show last time, President announced he revised the pay tax. So the maximum benefit that by increasing
20,500 rupees.
20,500 rupees, and from increasing it from 100,000 to 150,000, what a person got was 3,500. So average rice consumption per person in Sri Lanka is about 112 kilograms. Let's say 100. So he has to pay additional 65 into 100, 6,500 rupees only on rice because of this import tax. 6,500 for entire year. So from your tax relief per month is 3,500. So 2 months pretty much of your tax bill relief that you got is gone for your rice tax, and that's only rice.
And if you have 4 people,
household, that's your 8 months of your tax relief is gone only for rice. And you have bee onions, red onions, potatoes, this thing, everything, and your whatever that you received as a tax relief is easily gone by this import tax. And when Sujeewa shared the numbers, your Inland Revenue Department has raised about 2 trillion and your customs has raised 1.5 trillion. Is basically people, cost of living has gone. That's the main cost component. And also on one side you are trying to get investors, and when you are charging a tax at profit, you are paying the tax after you make a profit. But when you have an import tax, you are paying even before you make a profit. So that's the problem when you have 1.5 trillion from customs and when you have 2 trillion from income tax. That's the difference. And also when you tax, since you suggested capital gain tax on stock market, I think we have to adhere to the tax principles. The same study that Mr. Masakorala mentioned, you cannot select certain sectors and tax.
It has to be equitable.
It has to be equitable because then you can pick winners and losers through your tax policy, which I'm sure there are 2 chartered accountants. That is not the way to do it. Because then you are creating massive distortions and politicians take it for granted. Then they go backwards and tax for the profits that you have earned before, because they have the option of doing that. And especially when you have a 2/3 majority government, you have to be very cautious on suggesting that, because they can always go back and tax. And that happened during 2015. And if you have, that can open for corruption as well. Absolutely, it can open for corruption, because I can come and say, look, the finance minister has.
I want to ask a question on this Basil Rajapaksa's tax policy. When I recollect Dhananath during a press conference when he was asked why was this capital gain tax imposed, and he said, I was targeting 160 companies. I didn't want to put the burden on the general public. So in the eyes of the general public, this seems like a good taxation policy, because only 160 companies at the end of the day had to bite the bullet, whereas the 22 million people in the country were benefited out of it.
Not really, Shamir, because when you say 160 companies, there are employees, and when you have that high tax rates on them, of course they will pass it on the goods and services that they sell. So ultimately you are affecting everyone else, because when you charge from someone else has to pay for it. And that's the point, that even on the vehicle permits, when you are giving a vehicle permits, means it is same as the treasury writing a check to that individual saying 20 million or 10 million tax relief. It's same as a direct cash transfer from the treasury to the individual. So in that context, even now we are considering the vehicle imports as a measure to collect more revenue. If you are, I think at the moment the vehicle permits, they have said they are not going to take it forward as at now.
There are 40,000 permits right now as you speak in the market.
Absolutely. So you cannot, if you have those vehicle permits, I know this is not very popular, because most of the government officials, senior officials, they are holding more than sometimes 1 permit as at now. But it's not popular, but it's same as giving a cash transfer. I think it is far better rather than giving a vehicle permit. Actually, you do that cash transfer at the retirement, which is better rather than giving the vehicle permit.
Dhananath, very quickly, just for our viewers to understand, on this vehicle import taxation now, which was spoken by President Anukumar Dissanayake recently. Now, I just want to understand. Now, before the restriction came into play, a wagon R in the country was approximately around 2.2 million Sri Lankan rupees. Now, after the 1st of February, how much is it going to be?
I'm not sure about the numbers, Shamir, for few reasons, because we really do not know what the exact tax scheme is. I mean, it has been mentioned, but we really do not know, because what are the additional taxes which is going to be added. So what it said was, I mean, it's about 400 to 500% is the expected value.
Yeah, why I'm asking you this question is, Dhananath, now, just prior to the restrictions was imposed, it was around 2.2 million. But right now, if you want to buy a WagonR, it's going at around 4 million Sri Lankan rupees. So I just want to understand, must the people hold on to the vehicles that they have or sell them at the market? Just some advice.
I do not have any advice, Shamir, because our budget speeches and our tax policy is so inconsistent, and I do not want to get into trouble, because when you are reading the budget, it can be completely go on a different direction. But I want to bring a different argument here. I think our policy on taxing vehicles is completely flawed, because we are taxing based on the engine capacity, which was the reason we brought the engine capacity was for the same reasons, issues with the customs, because people under-declare and import vehicles. But actually it has to be on the CIF value, because the size of the engine is an engineering decision.
Right.
And also in the European markets, you are now making smaller engines because of the environmental regulations in Europe. So basically, when you are making the engine smaller and smaller, you put a lot of technology into it. And because of that, actually your cost of your vehicle is much more higher than a vehicle with a higher engine capacity, because you have put a lot of technology and thought process into that. So when you are taxing based on the engine capacity, it is, I mean, you are taxing a high value vehicle at a lower rate and a low value vehicle at a higher rate. So you are completely distorting the market by that policy. But it is, the reason is because we have a tax administration problem because of the issues at the customs, and we are trying to address it with a tax policy measure, which is completely going on two directions. So that we have to be cautious.
Right. Thanks a lot, Dhananath Fernando. Yeah.
The tax policy on vehicles is so flawed and it's ridiculous. We are the only country, I believe, Shamir, where you can sell your vehicle and actually go and buy an apartment or a house or a plot of land in this country. You can sell your vehicle and go and buy either a plot of land, either a house, or even an apartment. That's how crazy our tax policy, vehicle tax policies.
Thanks a lot, Sujeewa. N.R. Gajendran, senior partner of Gajma, tax consultant. Got rich this November?
Like you.
We had to pay taxes. So, we had to pay taxes.
I have been paying for the last 40 years. How many years you have paid?
Just 1 year. Just 1 year. So, guys, I just want to understand. Now, we're talking about taxation, right? The people are somewhat really feeling it now. The withholding tax has been increased to 10%. Now, most of the questions that I'm getting now, before we open the floor for questions, is the fact that withholding tax going up from 5% to 10% is also a burden on them as we speak. What are the woes of the general public on this taxation that has come into play after President Anukumar Dissanayake's speech several weeks ago?
Samira, if you see how we have come to this position now, we have had multiple crises in the past. 2018, we had the constitutional crisis. In 2019, we had the Easter Sunday attack. Then after that, we had the COVID in 2020, and we had the financial crisis. With all this happening, there was an uprising of the people, and they wanted a change, right? And that is the change that we are seeing apparently, where this government with only 3 seats have now over 159 seats, more than 2/3 majority on their single accord. You know? So what was the change we were looking for? We were, the trusted leaders were not trustworthy. We were in search of trustworthy leaders to be trusted. Trustworthy leaders to be trusted, because our trusted leaders are not trustworthy, and in the past we have not chosen trustworthy leaders who could be trusted. So this time there was an expectation that whoever the government coming, and this particular government, they will walk the talk and walk the walk, right?
Have they done it in the last 100 days?
Now, that's the point. Now, I heard the president before the election saying that their manifesto will be their commitment and they will be held accountable. And he was also saying that most of the provisions of the manifesto will be legislated. But my question is whether, it's your same question, whether they are walking the talk what they promised, and that is a great expectation. And before I think if you see the Ranil Wickremesinghe government, one of the main reason why people didn't like was one of the exorbitant taxes. Taxes are essential to run an economy. You need infrastructure, you need education, you need health, you have vulnerable people, you need money, that's no question. But we have learned, history has shown, if the taxes become unbearable, the legitimacy of the taxation is lost and the government could be challenged. So under that context, this present government, before they came into power, they said we will reduce the tax-free allowance will go from 100,000 to 200,000. Right? They said they will increase the slabs. And they also talked that highest marginal rate coming from 36 to 24%. They categorically said that there will be a multi-rate system, 3 rates or whatever it is, simple rate, lower rate, standard rate and luxury rate. And also they said the 3 items, food, medicine and education, certain things will be 0 rated. Now, whether you could have done this, and only now we have gone from 100 to 150,000 rupees.
But nothing but you have said,
yes.
We have done it.
So maybe we mustn't overthink and overtalk also. We'll see what's going to happen in the budget, whether they will bring any of these things. So now if that was the promise, and if they now realize it cannot be done, we have to come and say sorry and say this has to be corrected.
No, but they said several other things also, that fuel prices will be brought down, electricity prices would be.
So that is whether the trustworthy leader whether we have found a trustworthy leader to be trusted. We shouldn't have another uprising like in the past. And if you don't walk this talk, because the lesser privileged people, because your earnings have not grown, your purchasing power has eroded because of the rupee and the depreciation. And if earlier you were paying only 8% in taxes, consumption taxes, and you were not liable to tax up to 250,000 rupees, 3 million a year, you are not liable to tax. Now that has gone. 8% has become 20.5%.
Right. So, Gajendran, I just want to ask you a question now. Prior to Gotabaya Rajapaksa coming into power, the highest tax threshold on payee was 24%.
Yes. And
then he came to power and he brought it down to 18%.
Right.
Right. And then most of the economists, I've had people like Dhananath, Murtaza, Dumindu Hulangamo on this very show saying that this was a bad decision that was made, this has to be reversed and all that and more. Very well understood. So no one expected after President Anukumar Dissanayake came into power the highest tax threshold to be at 36%. Why can't he brought it down to 24%?
That's what it was told. It had not been done.
But would there be a significant impact on the revenue
it's like this, we cannot compromise on certain pledges we have given. The debt sustainability is one thing, whether debt is serviceable, whether from after 28 I still feel it is not serviceable. On the primary account the surplus, you must achieve the what has been promised, you must achieve the revenue target. My question is still this year's revenue target for this year, 24, last year was about 4.1 trillion. Whether we will achieve that or not, or we will marginally achieve, we will have to see that. But I still feel you had 4.1 trillion rupees at the top line, where you could have managed this. Taxes are reallocated if with facts and figures, they could have done and given the release that was promised.
Right.
You know, that has to be done. If you see, SMEs are destroyed. The smaller companies have gone off. Most of the business have gone to larger companies, and they have become larger. Right. So the profits, and if you see the banks and financial institutions, the profits they are making, it has grown phenomenally, right?
Banks are doing very well.
Yeah, and with the reversals that are bound to come, the profits are still going to go. So can you not, on the principled capacity to pay, whether you could have not taxed these super people who are making exorbitant profit or super, windfall profit?
So you are of the opinion that those who are making high profits have to be taxed at a higher rate?
Definitely, because the people who have been taxed are the people underprivileged.
So we have somewhat of disagreement already on the table.
And you know why it's happening also?
I'll come back to you, Gajendran. I'll come back to you. I want to open the floor. So Tiruni, Nilesh, barge in and ask questions. Yes.
Just to come in, give a number on this. To answer your question, last year, 2023, Shamir, we collected only 147 billion in PAY taxes. Or entire workforce paid only 147 billion. Asking to respond to your question, can you bring down 36 to 24? Of course you can. The amount of tax income what you're going to lose is not huge, because the entire country, entire workforce.
Then why aren't they doing it, Sujeewa?
Collected only 147. I'm quoting the finance ministry numbers, right? 147. So there is absolutely no reason why this cannot be brought down, and the revenue impact is not huge. So it can be done.
It can be done.
It can be done. There are only 147 billion.
So there was a disagreement. Now, Dhananath, you said that this super gain taxes should not be allowed because it's only it's not equitable. But Gajendran is of the opinion that there has to be a taxation of this sort, where those who are earning a lot of money should be taxed. Do you want to respond to that?
Basically, I think as an overall, because of the higher profits, they will be contributing a large amount, no? Because even if you of course, if you increase the tax rates further, they will have
but if you look at the numbers that are coming out of the Colombo stock market, the amount of profits the banks are making.
No, absolutely, I agree on that. But my point was, I'm fine for taxation, but do not compromise on the principles.
Yeah. It's about consistency, right?
Yeah, principles.
Being like that.
That's right.
You cannot change things this way, that way, this way. We as a country, one of the biggest problems if you ask foreign investors is there is no consistent policy in your country. Government to government, finance minister to finance minister, president to president. There is no professional way of doing things. So you go to a developed country. We are not the only country on earth, for God's sake. There are enough models to see how stable they are, right? How transparent they are. I mean, I agree with I totally agree about this super gain tax. I mean, they went retrospectively and charged people, of their tax. That is not fair. You can't have. That's a lawlessness, no. Law into the own hand of the politician.
So now principles. Inconsistency is one thing. Fundamental concept of taxation is principle of capacity to pay. And it should be progressive form of taxes. That is income tax.
But Mr. Gajendran, people don't have the capacity to pay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, if
the people who don't have the capacity to pay should not be called upon to pay. Now we are talking of 65 rupees paid on rice. It is regressive form of tax because it's a consumption tax, right? Dhananath will explain the marginal capacity to consume is eroded. You get poorer because of that. But there again, now if you see the stock market, it's another area, whether it should be taxed or not. There are only 180 companies actively involved in the stock market.
I mean,
there are 200 companies, 180
in this
companies.
Country cannot afford
and
to pay
I will give you the
taxation.
answer why they won't tax this. And they can't tax this. People with power and influence have contact at the highest
No,
level.
but that has changed.
No, it has not changed. It has not
Now,
changed.
Anukumar Disanayak is in
No,
power.
it has
What
not
are you
changed.
talking?
It has not changed. Then why is
Now,
that?
what is this? Now, there is change, Gajendran.
Okay.
You have to.
Now, Sujeewa, you spoke about the customs record revenue. Why is that something to celebrate? Because they, as far as I'm concerned, they didn't raise the money. They didn't work harder for it.
Correct.
They didn't do anything for it. We paid it.
Correct.
I mean, like you said, VAT was increased. So many things were, increased. We, the population of this country, paid it. So this is not something to celebrate.
You're spot on. See, the problem is this, Niresh. If you take 2024, entire focus was on fiscal consolidation and raising revenue. Nothing else. That is what President Wickremesinghe did. That is what President AKD is doing, or did for the year 2024, right? And going forward, I think now because we've come to a stable level, whether we can pay or not, I'll give you a solution on that. It's a different story. We need only talk about growth hereafter for the next 3 years. I don't want to talk about revenue anymore because we have achieved, as I said, we are getting very close to our budgeted number. Whether people can pay or not, we'll discuss that. We want to talk only about growth because by growing at 4%, 5%, Shamir, Niresh, people are not going to feel it. The farmer in Anuradhapura or Polonnaruwa is not going to even feel. You go and tell him we grew at 5%. Then කොහොමද? මට දැනුනේවත් නැහැ. 105ක් වර්ධනය වුණා GDP එක 2024. You don't feel it. You need that 7 to 8%. And we need to hear that growth story on 17th of February from President AKD. And I hope he will give us that story. Not the 2048 story which President Wickremesinghe said and no one believed. We need an actual growth story. How are we going to grow? I'll tell you how we can cut your tax. I am fully with you. I think the people in this country, cost of living has gone through the roof. People just cannot afford. I'll give you one way how to bring taxes down without impacting revenue. Our total rupee debt is 18 trillion. 18 trillion, T for Thomas. Don't get your billions and trillions or this thing. It's 18 trillion Thomas. How much is 18 trillion if you're paying 10% interest? 1.8 trillion interest alone per year. And Dhananath is the best person to explain this, the impact on interest. 1% of saving, 180 billion. 180 billion if your interest rate comes down by 1%. Right? So if your revenue can go up by 100 billion or if your expenditure is coming down by 100 billion, same impact on your budget deficit. Right? 180 billion if 1%. 0.5% saved. 90 billion. What would I do if I was President AKD? Managing this debt office, the debt is our biggest problem. Everyone is talking about debt sustainability. Central Bank and Finance Ministry cannot do. If I was President AKD, what I would do is I would hire the best 2-3 people in the private sector who can manage debt and come and say, you work for me. I'll pay you whatever the amount you want. Why? My annual interest cost on rupee debt, 1.8 trillion. How much did we pay as PAY? 150 billion, 10 times more. Right? What we pay as PAY, Shamir, covers less than 10% of our interest cost. Right? I would hire the best people and say, give me 0.5% saving on you come up with instruments, you look at how this can be done. I want to save 100 billion. You wanted to bring down 36 to 24.
This is exactly my point.
Done. So then we are bringing down the taxes. We are making it more equitable, as Gajendran said, right? People can afford to pay. See, at the moment it's cost of living. Why cost of living? It's an inefficient transfer of funds, Shamir. When you pay taxes from the private sector, whether it's an individual or a company, you are transferring it to the government. An inefficient government. Unproductive government.
Which is spending it, which is wasting it.
Which is wasting it, bulk of it, right? And there's no accountability, there's no one is monitoring it. So what is happening from the private sector, individual or a company, you are giving money.
But can't we expect that
Through taxes.
transparency? But can't we expect that transparency from the Andrew Kumar Dissanayake government?
I am hopeful that I will get that transparency and accountability.
Right. So, Rohan, now you have been involved in the export-import operations since 1992. You worked in the private sector. I think your hair would have been black at that time, but now it's now looking at all what has happened in Sri Lanka over the last 30 years.
After all what has happened, it's a miracle we have any hair on us.
Absolutely, yeah, I have no hair.
Right. I don't. I'm already losing my hair. So I don't want to go there. So Rohan, you've seen Sri Lanka. And I know that even in 2001, when the attacks at the Sri Lankan airport took place in 2001 during President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumartunga's time, you went to London accompanying Ronnie DeMille, who was the minister in charge at that time. And when there was a huge surcharge on the Sri Lankan ports and the airports at that time, you all were able to reverse and discuss and negotiate this. I just want to understand, Rohan, now you've been in many committees, many committees.
Too many.
Too many committees. I think the committee, when I checked on internet, it was around 22 committees you've sat in the last 30 years. What has these committees done for the country?
Shall I start crying?
No, I just want to know, Rohan, because we have you on the show. You speak very eloquently about changing systems and all that and more. But you've been part of 22 committees in Sri Lanka so far.
Yeah.
But what sort of change have you been able to instill?
Yeah, the thing is, I've been personally exposed to other countries. I mean, I worked, Sipers Academy started in Singapore, right? I'm a dual citizen, I never hide about it. I know how Australia works, right? I studied in the United States. I've seen the system. I see the progressive thinking of those economies, those people, right? Not only the government, even the private sector. In Sri Lanka, I must say the private sector, a large portion of it is deal makers. So ultimately, there is a corrupt country together, collectively corrupt country together. So whatever you try to do, sometimes the reforms are actually stopped by the private sector.
The private sector?
They are happy with the existing systems, right? More the system is not visible, transparent, the people within the systems are working. I mean, customs can't do import corruption so much without the private sector.
So let me ask you on that, Rohan, the digitalization, which, I mean, every day we hear the government ministers and President AKD, they're all talking about digitalization, this magic wand, which we know it works in other countries, but it has not been allowed to work in this country. There's a reason that customs is not digitalized. And not just customs, but many government departments. Now we are expecting the magic wand. Will it happen?
That is the political change people want.
Yeah, but will it happen? Will the customs, the inland revenue, will those bureaucrats allow this to happen now?
So from the president's office, the head of state has to, I mean, if you talk to the United Nations, they will say the countries that have successfully implemented digitalization has been led by the president. President's office has to be digitalized first. Finance ministry. Now today...
Narendra Modi is a classic example for that.
Exactly. So there are so many countries. I can give example. But for example, today if you want to know how much exports went out today, can we give it? We can't. Although customs have all the computers, right? It's not available.
No, but the Asthikuda system...
So that doesn't give. Why is our export statistics coming after 1.5 months of the November export results come to the end of January or mid-January or early January? That is how the system works.
Can I give you a real-time example where digitalization didn't work repeatedly? It is in the inland revenue. You had computerization, you had modernization, and then finally we had this RAMIS, the famous RAMIS. Under the famous RAMIS, there were two significant features that was laid down which was never implemented. That is, under RAMIS there was never a file assessor. There was never a file assessor. If there is anything to be done, there's a workstation, the system will identify the workstation and the person to be do the job, competent, capable person for the job will be assigned. That job is done and that person goes off. That system was one that. And also audits. The assessor can choose the file. Based on the risk, on information that is fed on the risk, the system will select the file for audits. Now when this was implemented, the revenue officers, not all, few of them, sabotage that. And then the commissioner generals have to go back to the file assessor again, right? So if we know the problems and we know the solutions, if we are not going, if you ask me one reason, is corruption.
Right. So I just want to...
just one thing, I want to just add one on this customs issue. See, do you know, Shamir, see, there is this big notion saying exporters are not bringing money, no? Right? Why is this question mark being raised? The issue is what Rohan mentioned. We cannot reconcile the value of the merchandise exports, right? I'm talking about, not services, right? Merchandise exports has to go through customs. We know how much is the invoiced value of these exports. What do you need to do? Exports are, say, is 12 billion. You need to just link it up to the banking system and see, did the 12 billion come? It may not come in the 12 months, it may come within 15 months. We can't check that.
Now they have implemented the system, right? So central bank gets the details.
Then this Uganda story doesn't come, no? If you can reconcile and say there are...
No, but Sujeewa, now I recollect a few months ago, we had a discussion with the central bank.
No, now central bank monitors all the exports. So now there is a system, the Azikuda system is linked to the central bank, and there is a monitoring with the banks. So there is a more clearer identification. So this story.
So this Azikuda system, I just want to understand, Rohan. Now, this system is a system that is adopted globally.
No.
Is it?
Not globally.
No, not globally.
Mostly developing countries.
Most developing countries, and this has been championed by the
UNCTAD.
Excuse me?
UNCTAD, United Nations.
United Nations, that's right. So United Nations has been championing this. Now, I just want to understand now, why can't we have a homegrown solution? Because now we talk about Sri Lanka. We're talking about Sri Lanka being the best software developers in the world. And I recently remember the chairman of EVIS, when he spoke about the London stock market, he said the London stock market is completely created by individuals in Sri Lanka. That is the amount of knowledge Sri Lankan software engineers have. Why can't we develop our own system? Because when we speak about these systems like Azikuda and all that, we know now we're talking about big words like mining for data and all that. I just want to understand, why can't we have a homegrown solution for this?
We have never had the will to bring a homegrown solution. So recently, I mean, we brought in, the British High Commission brought in the experts from India and Pakistan. I'll talk about India has Pakistan, and last week actually Bangladesh went online with 7 government agencies, and they have told the balance 12 to come on board on the 28th of February. So all of those countries have passed us and gone, right? None of them use Azikuda. Now get it right. None of them. Pakistan homemade software, and the Pakistan CEO was in Colombo about 3 months back. He's a customs officer, very energetic, very passionate about developing the border systems, and Pakistan is the only country in South Asia that has a National Single Window Act, right? So their systems are being brought in, and it's self-developed by 40 Pakistani IT experts and undersigned and approved by Crimson Logic of Singapore, which is the trade net of Singapore. Now, I have been telling our guys, why are you going outside to bring software to manage our internal affairs? This is national security, data mining, data protection. You have all of this, and you have the talent here. They don't allow you.
And in this Pakistan story, correct me if I'm wrong, Rohan, I saw in one of your recent interviews, you said that when Pakistan wanted to outsource
$25 million.
$25 million.
And they did it for $5 million.
$5 million.
Yeah, it's not my words, it's the Pakistan CEO's words. He was here in Colombo, and he was telling, I mean, how these things can be developed, right? So in Sri Lanka, there is no thirst to do these things. right? It's not only government. Chambers have to push for it, businesses have to push for it, right? Some of the business companies today, I go somewhere, they still have files like this in a modern 21st century. They are talking about government.
Our Chambers president, our Chambers chairman is president's advisor.
So he should be telling the president what the chamber is passing on or his members are passing on. So, I mean, it doesn't matter who the advisor is, right? Our country doesn't...
But that itself is conflict of interest, Rohan. What are we talking about?
I'm a personal believer, if you have a business interest and then being in government, I don't think you should do that together, whether it is anybody, whether it is the Sri Lankan Airlines, whether it is somewhere else or whatever. If you have business interest, you should not...
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It becomes conflict of interest. So that is a ethical problem that we need to solve it when we take positions.
So I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'm trying to pose these questions. Theruni, don't be silent, please pose questions as well.
May I ask one?
Yes. So this is for Dhananath. Dhananath, the bank FD rates have come down to 7.5% to 8%. Will people save money when inflation unofficially at 8% is high, and in addition to the 10% withholding tax on FDs?
So basically inflation is actually down. I mean, it's at deflationary stage as at now, and according to the central bank governor, it is expected to pick up in the third quarter of this year. So obviously when the interest rates come down, people are looking at better investment options. And on your first question, that's why I think there's an uptick in the stock market. Because people do not want to save, they want to direct money where it can get better return, and that's what...
But isn't that a bubble that we're seeing in the stock market?
I do not have any information, but of course when the interest rate...
Let's take me for an example. I've never been to the stock market, and I'm really reading about the stock market these days, and I'm very keen to see how the stock market is performing, because if I am to invest my money, I have to be very well versatile with exactly what I'm doing.
If the bubble bursts, you don't want to be coming here and...
Will I be someone like in 2012, 2013, or will I be the 25 to 30% growth that Sujeewa is talking about in a few years from now?
Now, Shamir, you can't, if the bubble bursts, you can't blame Sujeewa
or Dhananath.
Absolutely. No, I think this time it is mainly driven by two sentiments. I'm not sure about the pumping and dumping story, but when the interest rate comes down, definitely that impact is there. And at the same time, after the new government came into power, the stability, with the political stability and with the completion of the debt restructuring, there was some level of confidence.
2012, 2013, I just want to ask Sujeewa, you were very well, you knew exactly what was happening in the Colombo stock market in 2012 and 2013. There were stocks, Sujeewa, correct me if I'm wrong, they were supposed to build properties and hotels. And when you went and looked at these properties, because I was investigating at that time, there was just a marshland. I don't want to mention, and these individuals are now talking about being clean and all that and more. Will this happen again at the Colombo stock market?
See, I need to tell you, all these colleagues who are with me here today, they're all big time players in the stock market. Right? That's number one. It's not right. So number two, is, as I said, see, any market to work properly, you need regulation. Right? And the regulator needs to be tough, and you need to take action, and you have to take action quickly. You can't take action now for something that you committed in 2012, or, I mean, after 10 years or 12 years. I mean, that should not be the case. If somebody has done something wrong, action should be taken then and there. Within a year or two, that matter should be closed. Either prosecute the individual or agree on a fine. So I agree with you. I mean, a market to work well is, proper. That's when the confidence comes in. Otherwise, people have no confidence, as you said, Shamir. So that's all. So just one other quick point to what you mentioned on the interest rates. See, our real issue at the moment, Shamir, we have inflation at 0, right? Our bond rate is at 11%, right? And we have sort of then growth at about 5 to 6%. right? So we have a real lopsided situation at the moment.
If you look at it,
and also one other thing, we have short-term bills which are going at a much lower rate, and the long-term rate.
Taruni, you have a question?
Yes,
please.
Of course, Dhananath. So from the start, we were talking about how inconsistent Sri Lanka's tax policy is. Are there any long-term reforms that will enable the government to, balance the three factors of the revenue goals that the government has, which we desperately need right now, and also social objectives as well as economic growth, which Sujeewa said that we need to solely focus on for the next 3 years? Is there any way to strike a balance between the three, or will achieving one goal come at the cost of failing at another?
Absolutely. So I would recommend go on the principles, and that's why I have some reservations with President's tax revision, because it was in a way against the principles, because our need was to expand the tax net. So when you increase it from 100,000 to 150,000, you are letting go a big component of the pay tax base on one side. So it's against the principle. But if the President wants to really give a concession or like relief for the taxpayers, I recommend it is a better option to bring that tax rate from 6% to maybe 1% or 2%, so they will still be at the tax net, but you are not bringing the tax net down. So you expand the tax net over a period of time. That's the first option. The second option is, this is somewhat, I think, being long, I think this is slightly debatable, it's on the tax concessions, especially for big companies. So my recommendation is, again, go based on the tax principles, because why we have to offer tax concessions is when we do not have anything else to offer. So what an investor is looking at is basically the regulatory barriers, like, because he cannot have a upfront cost, because at the moment it has to be about 16 licenses that investor has to get. So that adds up. So on a long-term basis, basically we have to increase the tax net and make it tax competitive. Because when we talk about competitive with the region, we have to keep the tax rates competitive with our competing markets like Vietnam, India, Thailand.
No,
that's the way to look at it.
Let's take a look at the export taxation. It's at 30%, Dhananath, which is very high. There is no way that...
No, absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
There is no incentive in this country to export. I think when late Lalitha Mudalige was there was a statement, I think that's a common statement, export or perish, right? Now it is export and perish, because you see, you can't compete in the global market if you don't facilitate proper transaction costs, proper taxes, proper transparency to support export-led growth. Now even Ranil Wickremesinghe's government talked about export-led growth. Tell me one thing he did to do export-led growth.
He just imposed a 30% tax.
Right?
Yeah.
But Rohan, now it's been over 100 days with this government. Have we seen any such
Absolutely
steps?
no. They don't understand the export strategy.
Because this government also, to its credit, has been talking about exports, talking about tourism, but even for tourism, we don't see very much happening.
Walk the talk is not, we all agree across the table that the walk the talk is not happening.
So quick point on this, on exports. See, if you see our two big ones are apparels and tea,
For the past
our
years, yes.
Our apparel exports for the last 10 years is between 5 to 6 billion. No growth, zero growth. What has happened with all of our apparel exports? They have all gone overseas. You tell me how many plants they have started in Sri Lanka over the last 10 years? Very few. They are all overseas.
Like
Number
Kenya,
one.
Vietnam.
Yeah, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, in Libya, Egypt. Sorry,
In
not
Jordan,
Libya, Egypt.
in Jordan.
West
right?
Africa.
They are all over the place. Last 10 years, no growth
These are
in
Sri
apparel.
Lankan companies.
Sri Lankan companies, zero growth in apparels. And you take my word, for the next 10 years, there won't be any growth.
Yeah, but take my word, Sujeewa, even tea companies in the next 10 years.
I'll tell you on tea.
They are setting up operations overseas.
200 years. Where are we on tea? 1.6 billion. 1.6 billion after 200 years. Can it grow under the current policy framework? It can't grow. We will get that small amount. Take our IT exports. What did we say in 2020, Shamir? You may remember. 5 billion by 2025. Can remember? In 2020, they said by 2025 it will be 5 billion. Where are we in 2025? 1.2 billion. IT exports are 1.2 billion, right? So our exports have come against like a concrete wall. There is no growth. That's why I mentioned for the next 3 years, we should not be talking about anything. Our revenue focus, we are done. It's impacting the livelihoods of 5 to 6 million households, big time. They're struggling. Cost of living has gone through the roof, right? But our focus for us to get out of this rut, it's growth, growth and growth only, nothing else.
Yeah, but Sujeewa,
I just want to add something. Sujeewa talking about the apparel industry. I was Secretary General of it once. When we lost the GSP Plus, at that time we were growing at about 25% per year.
Correct.
Right? We started losing. So we were stagnant for about 5 to 6 years and we were around 3 billion, 3.5 billion. And it grew up to, after 2016, we got back the GSP Plus. So market access was back onto Europe, but by that time we lost a lot of business. So again they went back to about 5 billion. There has been a growth from a down and a growth, but that is compared to other competing countries because the business environment is not right here. People have moved out, people have...
Even the tea industry, Rohan, for that matter, I know a lot of companies have set up operations in overseas, like in Kenya, Dubai, India.
Yeah, so that is because protectionism for few people. Simple as that. So the government policy is protectionism. There is a huge problem in this country for many sectors.
And the worst part is, Rohan, these individuals who have set up operations overseas do not want to liberalize the tea industry in the country.
They don't want to liberalize that, they don't want to liberalize
because
shipping.
they have already shifted their money. So now they are selfish.
Exactly.
They want the industry in the country to close down, and whereas their operations overseas can thrive.
So I've never been in the tea sector, but I'm in the export sector, and I've been a voice there some time back. You can remember that, right?
Yes.
Talking about liberalizing the tea sector. I've been talking about liberalizing the shipping sector. What does it contribute to the economy?
And let's not forget, these are big boys in the industry holding big positions at many fora, and not doing anything about liberalizing and
this is
thinking
why I
about the
say the
interest of the
private sector
country.
is also corrupt and deal makers in this country. Why did I make that statement? Everything is protectionist for few people, and our Gini factor is like this, going like this. That is why people are getting poorer and poorer. Few people are getting billionaires, and they put in the stock market and triple it. That's a different story, right? But we have a cockeyed system.
Now,
The rule of law in this country is not there.
Sujeewa, you spoke about savings. Now savings it's economic theory, right? You need higher savings to grow the economy for investment. But our savings are being siphoned off by the government. Every time that the people might try to raise their heads, the government imposes a tax or something happens, and then, bang goes the savings. People, how many Sri Lankans have any savings left? How many Sri Lankans have gold? That's been a traditional place of savings, right? People buy gold. But nowadays, people don't have gold. They've pawned all of it. It's all in the banks.
So now, Samira, there were arising from that question, there were two important points you raised. Dhananath said the competitiveness, tax competitiveness. And Sujeewa was saying we need growth. Now, incentives from tax point of view, exemptions are taboo. But we have to see whether we can find incentives by giving those incentives will boost the GDP. That is, boost growth. Now, if you give expenditure-based reliefs, right, if you make in investments, in capital assets, productive assets, new assets. Earlier we had enhanced tax-free allowances, that is finished. Then R&D is a core factor. R&D expenditures also we had, that is finished. Then you have to see whether if you are going to build brands, food security, all those expenditures should be given additional benefit, which will increase when you are spending. It improves the GDP. That brings about income, employment, and growth, right? So because we have to be competitive. If you see, why did we started when we started in early 2000, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Vietnam, exports were almost similar. Right? Now, Vietnam is about 360 billion. Bangladesh is about 40-50 billion. Why we are still at 10 billion? You know? So why is that Sri Lanka, which should have been a darling for foreign investors, why are they not here? You have to find the simple answers. Upfront cost, ease of doing business, what is your tax competitiveness? You know? So if you can identify, there are answers there, problems are there, solutions are there, but we are not going from this point to the other point.
So we have a question for you, Gajendran, from one of our viewers. Do you think a family of 4 in Western Province could manage with a monthly income of 150,000 rupees, rent, electricity, water, bank loan, commitments, so on and so forth? If above, he is liable for tax.
No, that's what is in the principle of capacity to pay. You must have an income, first of all, to enjoy a minimum quality of life. Up to that point, you cannot tax them. Right? Up to that point, you can't tax them. If you ask any messenger boy or any driver or chauffeur, a family with 4 children, he needs minimum, he will need, say, is 100 to 120,000 rupees, you know, minimum.
That is just to survive.
Survive. And that is not, you know, basic.
That's just to put
Basic.
food on the table.
Basic, yes, food, basic. So, still, earlier we had 250,000 tax-free allowance when we didn't need it. But now, because of the heavy taxes and erosion of the purchasing power, even 200,000 may not be enough. Right? So, this is where we are getting mixed up in the whole process.
Yeah, but Mr. Gajendran, has the government ever done any studies on this? Whether
that's a very important
right
question
before they impose a tax.
Yeah.
Shouldn't they be looking at how much does it cost for a family of 4 to survive?
No, but
and
not
to
like
live?
Bandhugunawardhana's study, yeah?
2,500 rupees.
Yeah, 500. That's not the
You've
study.
still not forgotten that, no?
No, that's not the study that you're talking about. That's not the study.
That is lesson play.
Being a journalist, Gajendran, always to the point.
Now, you know, if you see our policy making throughout, up to this date, is ad hoc and lopsided. Do we have a research-based, do we have people who study, research, analyze and study systematically? Even these research institutions are having their own people to do that. Fiscal Ministry, Department of Inland Revenue do have? No. If you ask them how many people are paying over more than so many people, how many professionals, they will not know anything. So now data is, now if digitalization, if it is allowed, you must have this data, use AI, big data, to analyze this information so that you get wealth of information to make policy. Policy is ad hoc. You know, we are coming in rattling off numbers, right? But those numbers should be rattled off by the institutions. And in this country, institutions are not working, Samir. We are dependent on individual people. And that's the reason even for every small matter is going before the president. Because he's the prince in the shining harbour.
Yeah, but Gajendran, to be fair, even 3 weeks ago when we had Dhananath on the show, I posed the same question. Can the president really manage with 96 institutions under his belt?
That's my point. That is my point.
So,
that's
but Dhananath said
also, is the president an economist?
Our institutions are not working.
Complete
and institution
failure.
have complete collapse of the institution.
But what is
and
the finance ministry telling the president?
You mentioned about earlier interest, I missed that. Now with this 10% withholding tax, you know, it's a simple example. If you have 50 million rupees now, anyone has 50 and has only interest income, 7% is 3.5 million. He will end up with a refund. So people who are relying on only on interest, every other person will have a refund issue. And we can't, our refund system never worked. If we see, we have only an SVAT in this country for the exporters. No other country has, only because the refund has failed. And SVAT that was going to be removed, the big and mighty have been powerful, they have stopped it. But this poor guy who is getting small interest income, he might have to go for a refund.
So I just want to ask Dhananath now. I remember when Ranil Wickremesinghe took just before he took over businesses, I had you on the show, and then you were not advising, but you all were consulted by the finance minister, Basil Rajapaksa at that time, like think tanks, like Advocata was one of the think tanks. You all went ahead and made a presentation as well as to how we should get out of the bankruptcy and all that. I recollect you mentioning that on the show as well. Now, has this government consulted any think tanks? Let's put Advocata aside because you will be biased, but have they spoken to any other think tanks in Sri Lanka? Because we speak about studies being done, we speak about forward thinking, we speak about economic growth, all that and more. Have they consulted?
I do not know. I do not know.
But you all have not.
We haven't. I mean, we have given some of our suggestions with the interactions we had before. But I don't know whether there have been any consultation. But on the tax, I want to add one thing because the budget is coming. I think we are happy that we are almost achieving the revenue targets, and there's a big primary surplus. Because remember, the IMF, one of the main conditions is 2.3% primary surplus. I think we have pretty much gone to about 3%.
Yeah, higher than that.
But we need to understand how we have achieved it. That's basically by cutting down most of our capital expenditure. So capital expenditure is needed, basically what Sujeewa is saying, which we all agree. Only mantra is grow the economy. And when you are cutting down your capital expenditure, that is going to impact your growth. So my worry is, there was a conversation about public sector salary increment, and I am all for, because we discussed how difficult the cost of living is. But if you were to increase the public sector salaries, you cannot,
who's going to pay for that?
Exactly, who's going to pay for that? And probably it is coming from that primary balance that we have. But because I agree, because of the cost of living challenges, we have to increase public sector salaries, but not by compromising the primary balance. It has to come through the public sector reforms, because we have a very tail-heavy public sector, so you have to let go some of them and utilize that saving to increase. And that's why even in the last...
No, but Dhananath, this government has said they are not going to send any public servants home.
Then it's a recipe for disaster. That's why even in the last appearance I mentioned, the first 100 days are crucial. Because you can do reforms without compromising your political capital, and that's the important thing. And
but in that sense, Ranil Wickremesinghe took some very hard decisions, isn't it?
Anyway, he came to power in a different context, because anyway everything was unpopular when he was in power. So I think that was a different.
Do you think Anurakumar Dissanayake will bite that bullet?
I think he has the capacity, because he had the credibility, of course, because he hasn't been in the first.
So why I'm saying this is, now we saw Anurakumar Dissanayake having a meeting with rice mill owners, and it was quite a very stern, somewhat of a threatening message that was delivered by the president. But I can't find red rice even now.
Exactly. Coming back to your point, price controls didn't work. So this is definitely micromanagement, and we all do not recommend. But I think he has to do those hard changes. Otherwise, growth is not possible, because to grow the economy, you have to unleash those barriers. But I want to add on your question on tax reforms long run. One thing that we need to do is abolish this tax on, cess on imports. Now, not many people know what actually even cess stands for. Cess is Commodity Export Subsidy Scheme, and that was imposed many years ago.
Yes, right.
If you are exporting without value addition, to discourage that and to channel that revenue to development of exports with value addition. Now, what you are collecting from cess is 95% is from imports. Now, no one knows how this export tax ended up on imports, and because of that, you are having a cascading tax system where, your import cost is unbelievably high. and it affects you as an exporter and every exporter, because your cost on imports is also a cost on export. Because if you are, for an example, we spoke about the apparel industry, they basically export labor because they have to import raw material from Hong Kong, from China, and when you have a big import tariff, of course that is going to add on the export. So one thing on a long term, on a tariff basis, please abolish cess on imports.
I remember that there was a tax called NBT,
Nation building.
Yes. So there have been so many.
What have they done with that money?
I don't know, except the nation building, everything else has been done. I think now we have
I honestly,
Maybe it was another nation they were talking about. Certainly not built yet.
Port and aviation tax. It doesn't go to the port and aviation.
Correct.
It goes somewhere else.
Now we have social security levy.
Yeah, so those are the tax, I mean, on the import side that you have to remove, and that is in the mandate. Not removing those taxes, but simplifying the tariff structure is one of the main promises.
So I'm getting a lot of questions today.
Just one. Sujeewa, this last weekend we saw this huge gazette which came out, 38 pages, taxes. Why last weekend? What's going on? Has the government run out of money? Are they hard pressed? Why now?
So interesting one. So basically what we would have expected, Neeraj, good question, is that these to be included on 17th of February. But these are revenue measures. No? So the 38 pages that came out, what you mentioned, is basically 3-4 items. One is on cars, on motor vehicles, right? And as mentioned by Dhananath, and that's what the motor traders are saying, it can go up to 400, 500 or 600% on the CIF value. So the ones, Shamir, that normally you look at, you know that
no chance.
The mid-tier range will end up at about 80 million, the other one will be at about 40 million, the top range will be at about 150 million.
Just looking.
Right, I won't mention the name of the vehicle, but the 3-tier vehicle on that is about 140, 150, 80 million and 40 million is what we expect. Right, so leaving aside, so this is a revenue measure. Other one is on the sin industry. It had on cigarettes, liquor and beer. So today I spoke to a guy who does the beer in the beer industry. So they said the 625 ml has gone up by about 40 rupees. This is a beer, right? So these are easy ones to collect, and I would have expected it to be on including the budget speech. So if you ask me, so half the revenue. So still we need to be mindful. It's a good question, Niresh. This year our target is 15% revenue. No? That's the main thing.
15% of
GDP. And the 2.3% what Dhananath talked about on the primary account. So our GDP says 100 billion. $100 billion we'll say. Right? How much is 15%? We need $15 billion. Correct? $15 billion you multiply at 300 is 4.5 trillion. How much did we collect this year? Just under 4 trillion. 2024, just under 4 trillion. 1.5 customs, 2 trillion from IRD, 0.25 trillion from excise, that's 3.75, a little bit here and there, 3.9, 3.8, we are getting 4. We need 4.5 trillion. That's
so short.
We are 500 billion short.
Government is short.
Government is short. So how are they going to budget this 500 billion? Is your question, Niresh? Is it more taxes? Are the people going to suffer more even in 2025? Yes, we have to, because we have to raise 500 billion more. How are they going to raise it? My view, I haven't seen the budget document, right? I expect about 200 billion to come from vehicles, because the story is about $1 billion, $800 billion is going to be allocated on vehicles.
Already around $400 million have been allocated for vehicles.
Correct, right? So that's about 200 billion out of that 500 billion shortfall. We have another 300 to go. As Gajendran explained, the withholding tax will bring in additional revenue on this, because the 5% to 10% has gone through. There are a lot of people who will not be able to either get a refund or will be now brought into the net.
A refund is wishful thinking.
Right. I believe this 5 to 10% will bring in about 50 billion. My number is about 50 billion. Right. Last year on the 5%, they had collected about 70 to 80 billion, but that was on a higher interest rate. Rates have come down. My number is about 50 billion. So we have about 250 covered from the gazette that was issued last week. So we have another 250 billion. Shamir, let's have a chat after the 17th of February. How are they going to raise this?
So, is it your educated guess that we'll see more bad news in the budget?
There will be other revenue measures that has to be coming, because the 15% is public knowledge too. And our GDP, Dhananath, is about close to about 100 billion today. It's very simple arithmetic. 100 billion into 15%.
So, Sujeewa, this is looking very scary, no?
Sujeewa,
but that's the truth.
I can't be paying more, Sujeewa.
So, but the truth,
Like
For
it
what?
or not.
so
what?
This is it, Sujeewa. This is it.
No, the truth is we are on this IMF rail track, no? Whether we like it or not, the train is moving in one direction, right? In one direction.
But are we on the train or on the track?
You are under the train.
Under the train.
You are under the train, right? But the fact is, we have to collect 4.5 trillion this year.
Right. So, Sujeewa, I have some questions also.
One quick one on this. So this growth, Shamir, in my view, should be, that's all we should be talking about. And one of the biggest issues on this is that we are not doing, I think Rohan will agree with me on this, is trade. And without trade opening ourselves to the global supply chains, it's trade. It's growth. How do we get on that? One of the key elements of that is trade,
Right.
nothing else.
Right.
So when you say trade, are you talking trade within the country?
No, it's trade.
Supply chains.
Value addition, supply chains, global.
Chain. But we can't do that, because I think that was mentioned by one of the panelists, is because of entrepreneurs are not competitive. It's not there in their mindset. They are with the protection. They want to be protected by the government, either through cess, import taxes, duty restrictions on duty being imposed, because we are not competitive. You tell me two industries who are competitive, it's tea. You have to compete in the global market, and apparels. Apparels, they check their cost per minute.
No, but Sujeewa, to be fair by entrepreneurs, if you are a young entrepreneur, you go to the bank and try to get a loan.
Correct. That's a good point. See, today the interest rates, SME, if you're borrowing. See, these interest rates have killed the SMEs and the MSMEs, the micro guys. Today, what are we borrowing? You're right. The big corporates are borrowing at very competitive rates. But if you're a SME, you're borrowing at 15%.
15% easily.
It's 15%, right? Then, if you're pawn and you pawning is at about 18%. Right? Pawning is currently at about 18 to 20%. MSMEs are borrowing at about 20%. And on your credit card, you're at 24%. So you tell me, how can an entrepreneur raise his head with these interest rates? That's the actual rates today.
And there is also the Parate law is always hanging over their heads, although it's not been implemented now.
Yeah. Sujeewa, you said market to work, there should be good regulation.
Absolutely.
This is contradictory, because the definition of a market by itself is giving a free hand, void of any regulations.
No. You allow the market forces to work, but with supervision. So it can be market forces in anything, right? It can be the stock market. It can be the pharmaceutical market with a proper regulation. It can be energy providers with proper regulation like PUCSL. Or it can be education through we don't have a regulator for education. That's one of the issues we have on private education and state education. Universities has to be regulated, but you allow the market forces to work. But you need to make sure they play. See, it's like the cricket match, no? You allow the guys to play, but there's an umpire and a third umpire looking at it and say, are these guys playing by the rules?
Unless you played in Sri Lanka, where you create the pitch also.
Absolutely right.
No, but to answer that question, if you look at any developed free economy, the regulators are very strong.
Very strong, right?
Very strong, and they know their job. And even if you look at the anti-competitive laws, the fines they put on major companies, I mean that has to be there. That is how you safeguard the public interest.
Yeah, so I want to make this round very quick, because I'm getting a lot of questions today, and I have to take them to the panelists, because it's no point of us asking them most of the questions, because they are also watching the show tonight. So then another question for you. You mentioned the central bank has reported a deflationary position at present, with the cost of living on the increase, rice 230, petrol 390, eggs 35, current 180. Isn't there any relationship between inflation and the cost of living?
No, definitely. But inflation is, Shamir, the rate that the prices are increasing. And what we see because of the deflation, actually the prices are no longer increasing. The rate has, the acceleration has reduced. It's actually at a deceleration. So that's why at least we see some level of price stability as at now. But the challenge would be when we grow the economy, there can be because when we grow the economy, we need more dollars and we need more activity.
Right. So I remember, Dhananath, in 2014 or 13, if my memory serves right, I'm subject to correction. There were a lot of allegations of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka saying that the Central Bank was cooking up the numbers. Is that happening even now?
I do not have the information to claim that. But I think it is always better to have that transparency with the independence that has been provided for the central bank. That's number one. Number two is also one of the key IMF recommendations was to set up this public debt office, which now has happened, and also take the EPF out from the central bank, because then you remove that conflict of interest, because those are the channels that, you know, with that conflict of interest where you get into gray areas and people lose the trust on the monetary system.
Right.
So we have to avoid those two.
Right. So a question for Rohan. Rohan, you spoke about the logistics performance indicator index, right? So logistics performance index. You said that Sri Lanka is standing at 90 at the moment. What must we do as a nation to bring up this index to a position where we can compete with other global giants?
Yeah, so one of the major areas of the logistic performance is the border, that is the customs process and speed of doing imports, exports and transshipment, right? So we are weak on those numbers as per the World Bank studies. Then our doing of business freedom in this country, freedom index, corruption index, all this adding together, it adds up to become number 90. So we talk of a hub in the region, we are really not a hub. We're just a transshipment hub. I always say, people think we are talking of maritime hub, logistics hub, we have not even gone there. We are just transshipping containers from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and the region in the port of Colombo. We have never gone beyond the 1970s dream of Lalita Mudalige becoming a transshipment hub. But nobody has moved an inch toward going towards a maritime hub. So for that you need a lot of border protection reforms in customs, ports, whether it's BOI, other institutions related to supporting the border. Now if you target customs alone, that's not going to solve the problem. Where there are other institutions like the T-board, to quarantine, to agriculture, to others. Now if they are not on board, the same shipment can be delayed from those institutions. So that is why we talk about the digitalization, which is not rocket science, it's around us.
Yeah, so there's another question for you, Rohan. Now you spoke about a 200-year archaic law that is prevalent in the country at present. What do you think the Andrakumar Dissanayake government should do immediately to solve this issue, because they have a resounding majority in parliament, which is 159 members?
Yeah, so in his office there are two documents lying. Late Mangala Samaraveera did one from the government side by consulting all sectors, and then the customs trade unions also gave a proposal. So his team must look at this and see 8 years later whether we have to go the next step and bringing those reforms at the next budget and pass it.
So one question for you, Rohan, before I switch to Gajendran. There was a recent incident that the customs officials had said that they don't want CCTV cameras.
Yes.
So how can we digitize the country's economy when they don't want a simple system like CCTV cameras at the customs?
How can I answer that? How do you want me to answer that?
They gave an explanation for that. There are certain CCTV, when they do physical verification, they are able to find things the CCTV camera doesn't show.
No, that is about the scanners. That is about the scanners. This is about whether they work, whether they come on time, right? How do they inspect?
That's what we pay them for.
Right. So
because apparently last around 1 month ago we had Sean on the show. He said that There are no CCTV cameras even at the airport terminal where they're supposed to do
Most
custom
of the
verifications.
places where technology can be adapted, they don't want because they don't want to see that you're not in your seat, right? You're not coming on time. If you want the fingerprint, they will go on strike, in time, out time. So
Rohan,
it's corruption.
CCTV cameras are hardly technology. They are good
I know,
30
I
years,
know,
40
I
years
know.
old. I mean,
I don't think Hans Vijay Surya came to install CCTV cameras.
Definitely not. But then when it's not there, you have to install that also. So the micromanagement starts there.
Right. One more question. So I'm not going to take any more questions from our viewers because we're running out of time as well. We need to finish at least by 11:55, 12. One more question for you, Rohan. Would it be prudent, this is posed by Srinath Fernando, who's a regular viewer of Face the Nation. Would it be prudent if a national advisor is appointed to the Cabinet of Ministers on risk management and mitigation, or Cabinet Ministerial Committee to vet Cabinet papers or Cabinet decisions, given the plethora of cases filed challenging bills in the past and could be in the future?
I think this is the job of the Secretary of the Ministry. So Secretary is supposed to be high-ranking officer who goes through cabinet papers. So if we have lost the quality of the Secretary, then maybe another layer of scanning can be done, but that is not the way governments run. I mean, Secretary is supposed to do that job.
Right. So
Just one quick point on this trade barriers what they had. I was told, Shami, there are about 30 to 35 government agencies involved, like whether it's quarantine, whether it's all these other institutions comes into play, which needs to be far more efficient to facilitate trade.
It's 36, critical 18.
There you are, 36 agencies.
Gajendran, pay tax, what is the suggestion of the government?
So just they must implement what they promised.
Bring it down to 24%?
They said it will be 200,000 and bring down the marginal rate to 24% and increase the slabs.
So, just a follow-up question on that, Gajendran. Now, you say walk the talk, you eloquently speak about what the government must do and all that. Does Anukumar Dissanayaka's government have the political will to do this?
They have the mandate. They have the mandate. And they.
but if you have the mandate and you're going to be in office for 5 years anyway, what's the problem with taking the decisions?
Yeah, if you don't take the decision, what happened to the previous, we don't want that to happen.
We don't want that happening ever.
Yeah, because the earlier president who became a fugitive got 6.9 million on his own account. Anukumar Dissanayaka didn't get that vote.
He got 4.5.
He voted for 45. But only thing, the parliamentary election, they got more than 2/3 on their own. So why did the change happen? Why did the change happen? We were brought to a stage and we were going to make corrective decisions. I don't say that they could have done all what they said, but they shouldn't have said if they cannot do.
So are you trying to say, Mr. Gajendran, that everything politicians say should be taken with a pinch of salt?
No, it's a tragedy for this country.
I always took it with a pinch of salt.
No, and
Don't believe what they say before election.
No, and also now there is
Now even the salt is going to be in short supply.
accountability.
And by the way, 40 rupees tax on that,
On salt?
on the imported salt. See, that's why. See, you need to have separate discussion. One on growth, one on competitiveness. See, the salt. There is someone would say that we would be the most competitive in the world. To make sure, do you know how many of you all know the price of a kilo of salt today? It's about 220 rupees. To make sure that our guys don't go bottom up, right? Government has to impose a tax of 40 rupees on every kilo that they're going to import. We are going to run out of salt, right? Because of the weather conditions and so on. 40 rupees on every kilo of salt that you are going to consume is competitiveness. We are not, imagine salt, we are not competitive. We can import cheaper. So Shamir, we have a fundamental problem. Productivity and being efficient in what you are doing. Would you ever thought there would be a tax on salt? Why? To keep the price up at that point? Because otherwise we'll have a problem, because the local market will be 230 220, 230, and government will want to sell at 180, 190. You can't. Because then the local guys will go bottom up.
Yeah. So, Dhananath, I have a question for you as well. Tarun, you want to ask a question?
No, I had a question about the SMEs, but you happen to answer it in the previous question.
Right. So, Dhananath, you know Murtaza Jaffrji quite well, right?
Yes, of course.
For full disclosure,
he's our chairman.
He's a chairman.
On a volunteer basis.
In a volunteer basis. So you are the CEO of the institute, am I correct?
Yes.
Does your sentiments reflect his sentiments or the sentiments of your institute? Just for full disclosure.
No.
Before I ask this question from
No, sure. I think there are, there are things that we sometimes see differently. Of course, in a think tank, there are so many debates, different people see it differently. That's how a think tank works. But overall, I mean, in terms of our communication and on the areas that we speak about, we see pretty much eye to eye.
Yeah, eye to eye, right? Okay. I hope after this question is asked, your relationship would be still cemented.
Of course.
So, Dhananath, now we've had Murtaza Jaffrji in 2018, just prior to all this happened. And I remember Murtaza coming on the show. It was W. Vijayawardena, Murtaza Jaffrji, and several others who were on the show at that time. And W. Vijayawardena, Murtaza Jaffrji at that time said Sri Lanka is going to face bankruptcy if we do not right our course in terms of moving forward on the country's economy. Several years after, we met Murtaza again, just prior to declaring bankruptcy, around 1.5 years prior. He said, he made this famous quote saying, the country's economy is now in the ICU. And then he joined Ranil Wickremesinghe's administration as an advisor. Then everything seemed to be very hunky-dory. He came on the show and he said, now we are on track. We are on the right path. We are going on the right direction. I don't know why, but probably he was affiliated at that time with the government and he was an advisor. I just want to understand, do you all still believe the country's economy is on the right track?
Country's economy has recovered to a right track because of the measures which was very painful. And Murtaza was part of the state-owned enterprises restructuring unit, which was a reform that we advocated since 2016 when we incorporated.
Yeah, but now you know that the government has put this proposal out of the window.
Absolutely. So that is definitely quite worrying, but in terms of stability, we are in the right direction. And Murtaza wasn't an advisor, he was just a part of the SOE restructuring committee, and even he was critical about many of the government decisions while he was at the state.
So one was the Adani project where the power issue came up.
And also even President holding the finance ministry portfolio, he was quite critical. So in that sense, I mean, we have maintained our independence. And Murtaza, because why I think Murtaza joined the SOE restructuring unit on a volunteer basis was because we have been advocating it for 2016 and there's no point talking from outside if you were given an opportunity to do it. And unfortunately, things were quite delayed and there were a lot of restrictions when it comes to the transformative process. So I think Murtaza's, the prediction he made, not the prediction, what he said on this very show, still valid, because he said before the crisis we are kicking the can down the road. And even you asked, like Murtaza, you have always talking about there will be a challenging time. Where is it? He said, if you don't get the corrective measures, it will. And we also, it came rapidly. And as this famous quote, the crisis comes or the bankruptcy comes slowly and suddenly. And it came slowly and suddenly, and we also what happened. And at the same time, it was because of the corrective measures, I think it was in the right track. Still Murtaza has a lot of, opinion about the sustainability of our debt,
right.
Because 50% of our expenditure is on interest, and that's killing us. 50% is a lot. I mean, compared to our, that means at least if you're earning 100 rupees, more than 50 rupees, about 60 is going only to pay interest. And if you are using a credit card, you know what would happen only if you are only paying the interest, because that is not it's a never-ending cycle. So on that front, I mean, we tried our best and still we are trying our best, and that's why we are organizing this growth conference on 22nd and 23rd, because growth is the only solution. And when you look at the debt restructuring structure that the bondholders has given, I quite agree with Mr. Gajendran, there's an indication on a second default. Because their interest rates, they have kept that 9.5%, 9.75% in 2030, after 2028, actually the interest rates are going to jump up. So that can be an indication that they also expect there may be a possibility of a second default. So that's why we have to grow the economy, and to grow the economy, we have to improve the productivity,
right,
and do the hard reforms.
Just one quick one. Why this SOE reform? Quick point. Do you know that Ministry of Finance took $500 million from Sri Lankan Airlines, and it was taken over by Finance Ministry? How much is $500 million? 150 billion rupees. You know how much Aswasuma is? Aswasuma is just a bit more than that. What our entire social net expenditure. We could have doubled the amount that we gave to the poor people, and you were so concerned, Niresh, about that.
Yes,
we could have doubled that.
Ministry of Finance taking it means we are paying for it.
Absolutely, right? So that means the taxpayer.
Ministry of Finance is paying for it.
You are paying for it.
Yeah, it's not the
You are paying as a taxpayer, right? We could have doubled our Aswasuma allocation. If that was not done.
The stock market pays it.
And on the Sri Lanka,
let's just one more.
Dhananath, don't complain after that, Niresh. It's getting late. But you can ask one more question.
You use the word stability. You're talking about political stability.
and also the economic stability. If you look
but
at
where is economic stability when 25% of the population or more are still below poverty line?
No, on relative measures, I completely agree. 25% poverty is a very bad number, but compared to where we were, the exchange rate is somewhat. I mean, it's stabilized, and the inflation is stabilized, and at least we relatively, and we have got the debt restructuring done, and this phase is the growth. Comparatively, where we were from in 2022, it has come to the stabilization process, is my view.
So China will give us a big bag of goodies, no, now?
Not sure, but it's very important that we manage that geopolitics, because we know that on this research vessels issue, it is going to come up, and we have to manage it very carefully.
Right. So, Gajendran, your final thoughts. Optimism, right, Gajendran, this time? Optimism.
No,
what can we learn from Sri Lanka's lessons?
If this country wants to go the right way, the leaders should have two features. They must be honest, and they must have the critical intelligence. And that should go together. If we can't achieve that combination, we are in for trouble once again. So basically, you have to mean what you say and say what you mean, because people will lose trust, even the markets will lose trust, everyone will lose trust if you don't say what you mean and mean what you say. And our new laws that has come in is recognizing certain benchmarks to be achieved, GDP, primary expenditure targets. And if that is not achieved, there must be accountability brought in, right? And the biggest bane for this country is corruption and malpractice. Unless there are some big ticketed item is pursued on, and impunity and immunity should be something of the past if we want not to go into another crisis in 2028. We have 3 more years, 25, 26, 27, and whether this debt is sustainable. And now, if it is not sustainable, sometimes the blame is put on Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. They must engage with him and see what is this. Did you do this? Because they say 2 days before they have signed it, so we have to be with that. Is that correct? Why did you sign? And even the opposition leader is saying we are joined to ready hands to make the debt sustainable, right? So if the inclusive approach should come, because you have the mandate. So that's the way forward. Otherwise, we will sit here in 28.
There is more to do. There is more to do in Parliament rather than being at wildlife reserves,
That's not the only thing.
I hope in 28 we won't be seated here discussing this same issue. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Dhananath, your final thoughts.
There are three things that we can do to come out from this crisis. Number one is grow the economy. Number two is also grow the economy. And number three is also grow the economy. And to grow the economy, there's only one route that we have to take, that's on trade. And for trade, you have to have competitiveness, and that's the only way out. As Albert Einstein once said, compound interest rate is one of the greatest inventions in the history. The person who pays it is on the receiving end, and the person who is going to earn from it is going to earn quite a lot. And we are unfortunately in the receiving end, because as I mentioned, 50% of our expenditure is going for just for interest payments, and we have to bring that down, and the only way that we can bring it down as a percentage is by growing the economy. And at the moment, our interest payment compared to our revenue is one of the highest in the world. So that gives the shocking impact, or like shocking thought, that are we heading for a second default. So that's why the government and the policymakers should take growth seriously, and we have taken growth seriously. That's why we are taking the lead on organizing a conference on igniting growth, to understand the dynamics and build the framework how to think about growth on platform companies, on trade, on digitization, on all those aspects. But the only way out, what we have to think about is thinking on a growth lens, and for that I think the government should fearlessly do the reforms.
Have you invited the government to this?
We have invited all the cabinet ministers and the deputy ministers. Unfortunately, I think President is supposed to take part in another conference a week after, I think, and Dr. Hans Vijay Surya will be joining with us to speak about his digitization plans from the government, not representing the government, but to share his thoughts. But the important thing is the growth is the story, and we have a challenge also. If your debt is not sustainable, again we are getting to a difficulty in developing, getting to growth. So again, as I quite echo with Sujeeva's sentiment, growth is the only mantra, at least even to delay our default.
Sujeewa Mudalige, final thoughts.
So I agree with Dhananath. See, we need to do 5 things, and this is not what I am saying, and this is what IMF said. Right? There's simple 5 things. One is improve governance. Right? Governance means rule of law, niti adhipatya. Right? We know the problems you had. Right? Number 2, trade liberalization. Trade liberalization. Third one, which we haven't touched, we need to talk at some point, Niresh, is labor reforms. See, it's very easy for an investor to come here and start a factory in one of the zones. You just can't close it down. Investors are not going to come. And no one is talking about the labor reforms that you require. That's one of the biggest bottlenecks. That's the third one. It's not me who is saying, this is IMF is saying. For growth, this is what they're saying you need to do. Fourth one, SOE reforms. We can't be taking $500 million from Sri Lankan Airlines and Finance Ministry taking on. I mean, that's crazy for the taxpayer to pay 150 billion. Do you know, Niresh, how much is a packet of milk powder today? Just over 2,000. It's 400 gram is about 900 rupees, 950. A kilo is about 2,000, 2,100. Do you know how much tax you pay on that?
400 grams of imported milk powder is 1,500.
No, it's 950. 950, 400, all brands.
Yeah.
And a kilo is about 2,000, 2,100. You know how much tax is there in when a poor farmer buys a packet of milk in Polonnaruwa? 800 rupees. See, that's why I say we have a tax policy and a customs policy which is extremely lopsided, right? And we give a duty-free car permit by charging 800 rupees on a packet of milk powder, 65 rupees on a kilo of rice, 40 rupees on a kilo of salt, right? So those reforms have to come. Fifth one, anti-corruption reform. That's all IMF is saying. You do these 5, you are done. So I am confident under President AKD, I would see some of these ones getting included on 17th February. Hopefully we can have a chat to see whether these things have been included or not. If not, that's it. I mean, if you don't grow, see, we need to make sure that our country grows at a rate higher than our debt is growing. We have 100 billion of debt, correct? At 5% interest, forget about that, say that you're paying only in total, rupee debt, dollar debt, everything you're paying only 6 or 7%. So your debt is growing at 7%. And our economy size is also 100 billion, debt size is also 100 billion. So if you don't grow at a higher pace than our interest at 100 billion, by end of the year, you'll have 107 billion, 7% interest. So if your economy has not grown by that amount, what are we talking? So your growth rate has to be higher than your rate at which your debt is growing, and we are unable to do that. That's why, as Dhananath said, because of the compounding interest impact, our debt is growing, and economy is not growing. So that's why growth.
Right. Thank you very much, Sujeewa. Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy.
Yeah. So I think there is no issue. All three, I agree what they have spoken, but specifically, I've been in the export industry for 30 years. I am extremely disappointed with the current government as well as the previous government. What is the focus of the export of this country? Because in 2017 we developed a national export strategy. It's with the government. It had all the good ingredients, including all of these reforms we were talking about: productivity, competitiveness, digitalization, you name it. All that is there in 5 books sitting at the various ministries, number of ministries. But unfortunately, I have not seen anything. A lot of lip service on exports, and I hope that growth story will come from exports. And I hope the other one I look at it is investments. Sri Lanka has had a very poor investment record over the last 20 years. It's kind of a joke when you compare with other countries. I think Gajendran was talking about export growth in Vietnam and Bangladesh and all. I mean, you can. That's why I asked where I should start crying. We've been talking about these things, and the next budget is critical in these areas for that growth story. And of course, we have got a mandate for corruption-free governance. IMF has given us, as Sujeewa says, things to do. If we do those things, yes. But I simply am a little worried about SOE restructuring, the Sri Lankan Airlines story, inward-looking thinking from some of the ministers which I have heard. That can damage us a lot, and we may hit a second innings by 2028 if we do not.
Or even sooner?
Huh?
Or even sooner?
28 is probably the most possible if somebody is so stupid to do something more than that, even with the IMF scheme.
No, Rohan, I just want to ask a quick question. I usually don't ask questions the last round. I remember we had an economist who's now sitting on the board of many private sector organizations in Sri Lanka. He suggested that Sri Lanka is going to be bankrupt again before the year 2030, and he made a very strong prediction. He said he's saying this with numbers and he's saying this with accuracy. 2028 may be that year again.
I know this gentleman and I've seen his discussions, yes. So all depends on what we do from the next 3 years onwards, right? There is a potential. There is serious potential that we can disrupt ourselves. We did it, we have done it, we can do it, right? So I am concerned, definitely I am concerned. I also get involved in these economic discussions, and I also agree that the growth strategy, the export strategy, all this, I mean, I've wasted a lot of my words, but I still will waste my words on those because that is important for our economy. But I see this danger. I don't disagree with that gentleman that we will pull ourselves back again to a situation where we cannot sustain the debt and we can go into another default. And that happens, we are in a worse situation for the next 20 years.
Right. Thank you very much, Rohan Masakorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Nice to have you after some time,
Nice
Rohan.
to be here also.
Thank you very much, Sujeewa Mudalige, former CEO of PwC, always very vocal on the country's economy. Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocate Institute, a known face on Face the Nation, has appeared on many times. In our Gajendran, senior partner of Gajma, tax consultant. Gajendran, usually you have like a crystal ball in front of you and you prophesy about the country.
I gave it up because you have mistaken.
So today a little bit different, but I just want to give Dhananath 30 seconds. Dhananath, you are having this conference on the 22nd and 23rd.
That's correct.
For those who want to probably come and join and be a participant at the show, is that opportunity still available? Or?
Yes, opportunities is available. All the details are at the website. It will be at the BMICH. We are getting Stefan Durkon as the keynote speaker joining online, and Jan Mischke, who is a McKinsey consultant. Stefan Durkon authored a book under the name of Gambling on Development.
He's from the Oxford University.
He's from the Oxford University, and at the same time we are getting platform companies because they can improve the productivity of our tourism sector, on mobility, on our marketing platforms, on retail. So we are discussing 7 case studies on day 2. Retail, hotels, platform companies. On day 1, we are looking at the macro sector, starting from the central bank, the demography, and where the jobs are. Of course, with digitization and getting female labor force participation into the labor force.
Right. There is representation from the central bank as well?
Yes, there will be Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara will be presenting the case on the monetary side in terms of the growth story. So
something to look forward to on the 22nd and 23rd, Dhananath. Thank you very much, Peruni. Thank you very much, Niresh. I'm the consultant director at Newsfirst. Sticking to the time, sharp 12 midnight, Niresh. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Procrastination is attitude's natural assassin. There's nothing so fatiguing as an unaccomplished task. Government has to do more. We don't want to be at the receiving end and say, guess what, we told so that we are going to be bankrupt by 2028. We want the government to take food for thought and remember that everything is in your hands now. You have the mandate, you have the vote. Start acting and implementing now. Take care and good night.